Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Well, hello there, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host and founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. And today's guest is one I'm very excited to finally welcome back onto CPG. He's an award-winning co-host of one of the most popular and revered poker podcasts, The Chip Race, along with past CPG guest Dara O Kearney, the cheery, exuberant, and sometimes controversial Irishman, David Lappin. David took an atypical path to the world of poker after spending 7 years in college studying arts, philosophy, and screenwriting. He's also an ambassador for Unibet Poker and, of course, a world-class poker combatant himself. In my experiences with David, who's sometimes a polarizing figure in the poker community, I found him to be a continually entertaining and passionate ambassador for poker who genuinely cares about the game moving forward into the future. He and I share a myriad of passions, attitudes, and interests in and out of poker that you're about to learn all about. In today's thoughtful and greatness bomb-dripping conversation with David Lappin, you're going to learn why one of the biggest names in the poker world won't ever be on CPG or the Chip Race, hilarious and unbelievable stories about David's life on the tournament circuit, the surprising downside of being a sponsored poker pro, and much, much more. So without any further ado, I bring to you the always entertaining, engaging, and thoughtful David Lappin.
Mr. Lappin, welcome back to Chasing Poker Greatness, sir. How have you been?
I've been very well. It's an honor to be invited back on any show. Although you are the mass producer of podcasts, you told me off air that this is the 11th one you've recorded today. So I really appreciate it. But I also feel like I'm just part of a sort of a factory sort of conveyor belt style these days too.
Yes, you're a cog in the system. And it's not that your first conversation went so well. It's just I need people and... Gotta do what you gotta do, right? That's why you're having me on the Chip Race for next season, right?
Exactly. That's actually the very same reason why I ended up with my girlfriend, because we'd gone out once before, and then she had tried other people, and then just eventually just had to come back to me.
Yeah. So it was her, not you. That makes more sense.
Sorry, actually, I need to be careful. I didn't mean, if Sharon ever listens to the show, I didn't mean for that to suggest that she had tried out that many other people. I'm sure it was like the right number of people. I'm sure like a polite, demure number of people, but other people and then me again.
Yeah. So basically, you made an impression. You made an impression. You were good enough to keep around for a little while.
You mentioned there that are we having you on the show, and I do have to say that I've fought so hard over the years to keep you off the show, but Dara O Kearney has finally got his way, and we are having you on, I think, in like a month or two.
Yeah. I knew Dara pushes hard, and I knew
He's
where
the real boss.
I knew where the bottleneck was, David. It was never a question. I knew.
The bottleneck is the fact that we don't make that many shows, and like you kind of don't fit into all the slots because. Well, actually, that's not true. We obviously could have you on strategy as well. But we never have anyone else on another slot unless they've been on as a guest first. That is actually a rule we've held to in all but one case. So we had to have you on as a guest first. And there's just a lot of people, as you know very well, there's a lot of people in poker. In fact, we're probably having you on our show at an earlier point in our show than yours, because you're on episode, like I think this is like 673 now.
Yeah, 1232 actually, but who's counting? No, I mean, so like we were having a conversation about in the pre-interview, I wear that as a chip on my shoulder where, like, and I've talked about it a number of times on the show recently, but like it gets me fired up because like as a cash game player, you go under the radar and you don't always get a ton of recognition. You don't get the prestige of winning a ton of money publicly, right, in the MTT streets. And what's sort of happened with me over time is that, this is my life. Poker has been my life for 17 years. And I think that when I started the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast, it was fun. It's exciting. I love doing it. Don't get me wrong. But at some point, like, the perception of me started changing from like my inner circle from like a professional poker player who competes at a high level and thinks about the game at a high level to more of a content creator. And that's something like that I've struggled to kind of come to grips with, of like, I don't want to be a content creator because, like, I do want to be a content creator, but I'm also a fucking animal at the poker table too, right? Like, and so I guess I felt like I'm kind of like losing that identity by spending so much time and energy releasing shows and just doing all these other things that, like, that's sort of, I like having the chip on my shoulder of like, yeah, it's okay to be underestimated as it relates to poker talent or poker ability. I'm just going to get in the streets, play some high stakes cash games, and remind people, where I came from.
Well, look, I do have an overlapping story because I can relate. And so before I was a poker player, or at least it was at least a little bit of time right at the beginning, for me, that's going back about 14 and a half years. I was a screenwriter, pretty new to that too, but had a little bit of success early and was trying to, get into that world in a big way. And when I was a writer and I was sort of dabbling with poker and making a bit of poker money on the side, I didn't like if a stranger asked me in a pub, what do you do for a living? I used to tell him I was a poker player because I thought, like, writer is so wanky, and then you don't like, and I hadn't had anything like the TV show I was working on hadn't been made yet. So it's like, can't actually point to anything that they could tangibly understand. So I used to say I was a poker player. And then when I became a poker player, I started feeling bad about the fact that I was a poker player. And when that same person, that same stranger in the bar would ask me, what do you do? I told him I was a writer. And I realized after a while that what's actually happening there is I'm deeply ashamed of myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, this is a great story to tell your therapist, I think.
Yeah, I realized that I don't have to pay you for this, do I? No, that's okay.
I don't think, not yet.
It depends on how deep I go.
Yeah.
No, I think what it was really manifesting was that there's something kind of cool about being a poker player. And there's something kind of cool about being a writer. But there's also something kind of ignoble about being a poker player. And there's also something kind of frustrating and like you're an artist. And that's kind of a wanky thing when you're a writer. So both jobs kind of have aspects that you want to embrace, but they have aspects that you don't. And I think that's what I struggled with, or maybe still do. And I suppose these days, or at least for the last 4 years, merging the two by being a kind of a poker space content creator, and I do hate all those terms, but I guess they do apply. I do feel better about myself overall, but then, like, I used to do very well and punch much higher relatively 10 years ago as a poker player. I've sort of sacrificed that to do the other now, and I'm okay with that. But, you still feel it, like you still would like to be in there, maybe playing higher stakes than I do or whatever it is. So it's a funny one. It's a funny one. I still would like to think that with a bit of opportunity to not make content and just sharpen up my game for a little while, I could get back to punching with maybe not the very best of them, but, close to the best of them. But it is a struggle because I don't want to let this other side of things go because I get a bit more overall fulfillment from it.
Yeah, it's a dance, and when you play poker, when you're successful for, over a decade, it becomes a large part of your identity and how you view yourself, right? Like, I view myself when I walk into a card room as a high stakes player, and I'm going to sit down and whatever, it's my comfort zone. I'm going to compete and I'm going to play at a high level. And like, over time, if you're not doing that very much and you're releasing content and you're like, now your kicks are in how many downloads you get per episode, you're like, man, I miss the streets. Like, I miss battling. I miss the competition. I miss seeing what I'm made of, and proving that, like, proving that you can still compete at the highest levels of poker. I think that's an important part of it for me.
I will be honest though, the getting my kicks from the number of clicks is not part of me at all.
Really?
Dara always says that I'm sort of a contrarian by nature. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I used to have this rule when I did Twitch for a year that if you subscribe to my channel, you got blocked, because I didn't want subscribers. I didn't want people giving me their money, or I felt uncomfortable about the whole relationship. So I don't know. Obviously I'm really happy that lots of people listen to the show. I'm really happy when people say something nice about something I wrote, and that's all great. And I suppose ultimately I'm very happy that Unibet keep paying us to make it, because that's the sort of main incentive, I guess. But from a personal point of view, the main incentive is twofold. One is working with Dara, who I genuinely love working with. I think he's a great collaborator. He's an interesting person. He's a very close friend. And, you know, it's an opportunity to basically spend time with your friend, but you sort of get paid for it and you work together. It's a great scenario. And then secondly, sort of a personal satisfaction of being really happy with the finished product. And then, you know, when people say nice things, it's lovely. And I do get a lot of happy feelings, fuzzy feelings from that. But it's more about the other two things, probably, for me.
I mean, I like all of it. Like, I love the conversations. I love having people like you on. I love creating these relationships that give me fulfillment and joy. And, you know, obviously, let's be real to the listener. Like, you make more money playing poker. At least,
yeah, I did for sure.
At least for a while, right? It takes a very long time to make comparable revenue from content creation as, you know, if you're a high level poker player. And so it's really a labor of love. And, you know, that was sort of what we talked about too in the pre-interview, was how much content I put out, how many episodes of CPG. And it's easy for me because I love doing it. Like, I love having these conversations, and that's why I'm able to churn out so much content. And that's why, like, some other podcasts or poker podcasts that come out with like an episode every other week and then struggle to do so, where it's like a chore to just put out that one show. I don't think that would ever be my problem, because like, I want to be here. I want to have these conversations. It's exciting to me, and I get a big dopamine release at the end. And yeah, I'm a nerd, so I look at the metrics, and it makes me happy when I see my follower count go up and see my downloads going up over time. That gives me a little bit of happiness. But at the end of the day, if I'm being honest, I do the show because I love doing it, and it gives me fulfillment in a way that beating people out of money for 15 years didn't really give me a ton of fulfillment. Doing the show does.
Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable.
And so going back to you, what have you been doing this past year? Yeah, by the way, I do find it a little bit of ironic with you banning people that follow you on Twitch and not caring about the metrics. And yet everywhere I see is you mashing these things up that are going viral all across the poker sphere. So I guess what's that about?
You mean the little video snippets I made for a while, or still kind of make occasionally? To be honest, that was mostly to do with, I kind of had a bugbear. I suppose I constantly do have a bugbear, which is that most people don't commit to an entire 2-hour podcast, for example. Most people won't read a long article. Like, that's even too much for a lot of the modern viewer these days, or listener or reader. So I always feel like there's a huge danger that you end up with a lot of sort of secondhand opinion. Someone says, "Oh, did you see such and such a thing?" And you say, "Oh yeah," and you kind of make your opinion based on what they said, and you might pass it on. And actually seeing the real thing take place is more reliable. And if you can sort of cut clips together, like, essentially, like, no one was doing it in poker. And you see it actually with the media. Like, you look at the mainstream media, there are people who are like professional news clip tweeters. And I just thought, well, no one's doing that for poker, really, not in any kind of somewhat regular way. We obviously had the Polk Negranu stuff, which was creating a lot of good content, but most people weren't going to watch like 5-6 hours of that. So I thought, oh, well, once a week, maybe I'll just do a little snippet of the highlights or lowlights or funny bits or whatever.
Mostly the lowlights. Let's be honest. There's a lot of lowlights, right?
But then, like, I suppose it comes down to your opinion. I think that was one of the interesting things for me is like, while I've had my run-in with Daniel, even maybe a couple of run-ins over the years, I never put those pieces out in an effort to antagonize him or present a bad side of him, because actually, even though it might have been him swearing at his computer or stuff like that, I actually found that a much more human or likable or understandable side of it, if I'm honest. So I never put those with judgment. You'll never see those tweets go out going, Daniel Negreanu's an idiot, and then, you know, the post. It was always just like Polk Daniel meltdown, or, you know, whatever it was. And it was just a 1-word or 2-word description of what you were watching. But I wasn't trying to put past judgment on it. And if anything, I actually kind of don't have bad will towards people who are frustrated when they take bad beats or whatever. There are times when Daniel will say stuff that I do find reprehensible, and I have absolutely made that clear on a few occasions, but most of those videos wasn't that, and it wasn't just the Polk DNEG stuff. I've made them about loads of different things as well. And
those are just the ones that I saw. Those are the ones that had the highest share rate and velocity.
You're probably right that they're the ones that went a bit more viral. Like, I make those same things for our own show. Now, those ones don't get like 100,000, 200,000 views. They might only get like 20,000 views. But I push every episode of every show we make, I push a clip like that too. So it's just also, I kind of just got good making this little editing software on my phone. Quite enjoyed it, just lying in bed making them. So they didn't take too long. I kind of just thought it was worthwhile. I kind of thought, well, it's more likely people will actually have an opinion on the thing that actually happened if they see it, and people will watch a 2-minute clip. So that's kind of what that was about. But again, it's not like I didn't you can't make things go viral. You just make a video, and sometimes they get fucking liked or shared by someone more famous than you, and they go viral. That's kind of all that happens there. So it's not like I wasn't paying for promoted tweets to like spam everyone with my fucking phone clips.
I mean, the clips were cut together very, very well. I mean, I watched them, and I don't really watch much of anything that happens on Twitter, really. And I saw them; they were funny, and ultimately, at the end of the day, someone was having those reactions in a public space, and so it's just fair game.
Oh yeah, no, I don't look. No, none of them would think it wasn't fair game if they go on Twitch or whatever and say it, and then someone clips it for Twitter. It's not like that's it. But it was just more for me. Like, I think it was probably just me fucking about enjoying doing a bit of editing. With
you like antagonizing Daniel a little, right? Like, there's a piece of you that like not any piece at all. You get no joy out of antagonizing.
I would rather have no interaction with them ever, really, to be honest. Like, I guess if there was an opportunity to interview him in a sort of a fair sense where it was like, you know, maybe a proper interview space, I wouldn't turn it down, because I think there would be some value to that and merit to that, and hopefully you would get an honest interview. And I do consider myself someone who does decent interviews, so I don't want to say welcome it, but I would certainly not turn down that opportunity. But it's not something I'm looking for at all. And actually I would rather just like have no interaction with him. But then someone said to me recently, like, oh, you obsessively tweet about Daniel Negreanu. And then I checked my Twitter stats, which I almost never do. And I had tweeted DNEGs or Negreanu on, I think, 93 occasions. And I've sent 39,000 tweets. So I was like, well, he's quite a dominant person in the industry I work in. That doesn't seem like overly weighted. But like what you said is it probably was the tweet that went viral, or it was the whatever. So maybe that's why it's seen that way.
Yeah, that sticks in the memory, right? Like those 93 were more impactful than, you know, whatever.
Well, definitely a lot of like my cricket tweets.
Right. Yeah. Like, out of the 30,000 tweets that you've had, let's be honest here. All of ours, we have at least 50% just total and complete bombs that nobody ever reads or sees or even looks at again. And then some that lots of people see, and those are the ones that kind of stick in folks' memory. But all right, fair. We'll say, if you tell me you don't enjoy antagonizing him, I believe you, and we can move on. Let's talk about the Lock-In, your YouTube show that has sprung forth from the pandemic, correct? Like, that's something that sprung from the pandemic. Tell me about that and what y'all have been doing over this past year.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. It was April 1st last year, so pretty much a year ago, just over a year ago. and we decided that we should create some extra content, and we didn't really know what it would be. We knew we wouldn't be playing live for at least the foreseeable future, so we knew we would have time to make something extra at home. We knew we weren't offering value to Unibet Poker as live ambassadors because they would normally schedule 10 or 11 events every year. Roughly once a month, we'd go off to one of their events, and we weren't going to do that. So we weren't going to be, physical presence at things like that for them. And that was a loss of value for them, which we kind of thought, oh, well, maybe cynically, come contract negotiation time, they might have spotted that we're not as useful anymore. But also just in a general sense, like you feel like you're part of a community in Unibet. It has a lovely community kind of based audience or consumer base. And it's all very intermixed. And those live events do enable you to get to know a lot of the players, which is nice. It's a kind of one of the medium-sized tours rather than the super big tours. So you do get to know everyone. And we just thought, well, we should try and do something for that audience. Maybe piggyback some of the chip race audience, but maybe more importantly, find a newer audience on YouTube where we'd never really done much. We had done strategy videos at that point, which in fairness, some really popped and did quite well. But we only made one of those a month, and you're never really going to build a YouTube channel doing once a month. So we thought, well, let's try and do a little bit of something else. We didn't know what it would be. Initially, you watched the first 2 episodes, just me and Dara talking, just reminding each other of funny stories or having an opinion on something that happened last week in poker. A lot of pandemic talk, like in the first episode or 2 as well. And then we sort of realized that this was just a bit low energy and it probably needed something a bit more focused to keep it going. And we thought, well, let's get a guest on. So we had Neil Farrell on, we had Jennifer Shahade on, Jamie Kerstetter came on. They were some of the early guests, and we just knew they'd be fun people to talk to. So we just similarly have the little triangular chat. And then more and more the topical stuff kicked in. So I'd say by maybe the 4th or 5th episode, maybe a month or 2 in, we realized that when we spoke about things that were going on in poker, you might have a better quality conversation. You might have a real substantive chat. And then that sort of grew into the show. I think probably at some point around episode 6, 7, 8, it pretty much became almost all that. You might kind of focus one question around the guest or something they're doing, but pretty much we talked about the 3 or 4 newsworthy topics of the week, all weighed in with our opinions. And I think it became a kind of a pundit show where we could, flex that muscle, if you like. I think Dara and I are decent writers, and we've written, blogs over the years. Dara's blog is especially good, to be fair. And I think we just kind of thought, well, this is an opportunity to sort of do those kinds of opinion pieces, but do it on camera to a YouTube audience, maybe find some new listeners for the chip race, maybe create a standalone piece of content in and of itself. And that's been really fun, actually. That's been a really fun new piece of content, much easier to make than the chip race. I do a little bit of prep on what we're going to talk about. Dara and I have a very quick warm-up conversation, and then we just kind of go. And it's like recorded in an hour and it's rendered, and my girlfriend does the artwork and she cuts it together, even though it doesn't really need much cutting. And it's an easier show to make. It only takes a few hours as opposed to the chip race where 28 man hours go into every chip race episode.
That's a lot of man hours, 28 hours per episode. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of a little story about the Potters, and basically they had a competition amongst Potters to see who could make the best pots, and they had like 2 hours to make as many pots as possible. And basically they found that the Potters who made as many pots as they possibly could dramatically outperformed the one that spent 2 hours making one single pot, right? And to me, it's like you didn't really know what you wanted for the lock-in, but you started making your pot, and then you started figuring out and finding what you wanted over time. And then by episode 6 or 7, you knew what the lock-in was going to look like, and then you just worked from there. But I think, like, for the listener, just bear in mind that, like, if you have an idea for something that you want to pursue, just do it and see what happens. And from there, like, it's probably going to suck because most things that you do for the first time are pretty horrible. But over time, you get experience, you find out what resonates with the audience and what you enjoy doing. And that, to me, is just a really good way about trying out new things. Just jump and then kind of ask questions afterwards. So yeah, kudos on the lock-in, kudos on the chip race. what else have y'all been up to? Have you been playing a ton of poker?
I've certainly played more online poker in the last year than I did in the last couple of years, but that's mainly down to just having the no travel time and the no live poker time. I sort of settled into 3 days a week. I just play Sunday, Monday, and Thursdays, or sometimes I flick in a Saturday, and then take the occasional extra day off, but that's pretty rare. And then about twice a year, when Unibet have a big series, I might play every day for a month or every day for 3 weeks or whatever that happens to be. And yeah, so that's been more online poker than I've played in quite a while, which is good because you do definitely feel sharper, particularly into the second week of playing every day. So I see that, you feel the muscle memory come back. You feel the brain engaging a bit deeper into spots. I generally mass multi-table, or I guess what would still constitute mass multi-table. And these days, it's a lot less than I used to. Back in my prime, I was 40 tabling. These days, I'm 24 tabling. But I think as well, like you're giving up equity when you do that in each individual game. So fast, better decisions are things that take a little bit of practice getting. So I always feel like when I'm not quite playing as often, I do lose some sharpness. And that shows in the results too. I had a good result back at Christmas. I made the final table of the Unibet Open online, which we did an online version, much like every other live brand has done this year. And that was nice. And my good friend, Porrick O'Neill, won that. So that was good fun. That was sort of like that was almost like making a live final table in my head. It was the closest thing to it this year. But looking forward to maybe playing some live poker before the end of the year. Malta's caseload for COVID has come down quite considerably. There is talk of some festivals here in the summer. There's a good chance I might even be vaccinated by midsummer. My age group looks like it might be late June, early July. If I was vaccinated, I would certainly feel a lot more comfortable doing something like that. And then, of course, like the light at the end of the tunnel that we all feel right now, that is Vegas. And just thinking, we'll like go to Vegas in October. That could be fun.
Yeah, I'm fully vaccinated now, which feels pretty good. I'm pretty smug about getting access to vaccination and being vaccinated, and happy to start doing some traveling to meet some of the folks that I've had on the show and some of the people that listen to the podcast that are members of my community. Haven't had that opportunity over the past year and a half. So I'm very much...
Well, of course, people don't realize that you're actually 74 years of age. So you would have been quite high up on the list, I'm guessing.
Right. I'm 74.
They're also boys, but
they're going to be surprised that I'm like 4'10" as well. They're going to be shocked by I'm like a micro-sized human that you can just fit in your pocket. It's not exactly true, but whatever.
Did my jealousy of your vaccinated body come off there? I hope it did.
It did.
It was intended.
I felt it, but it just pinged right off me because I don't care.
That's what vaccines do. They just, you're impenetrable,
Yeah, I don't give a shit about your jealousy, David. I'm happy being me. So let's go back a little bit. So there is, shockingly, believe it or not, a format for these round two conversations. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Shockingly, I thought about what we're going to talk about here. And the first thing that I want to ask you was, who's your biggest influence in becoming a poker professional and why?
So like right at the beginning kind of person or throughout? I
mean, both, like either or both. And it could be virtual, it could be Mike McDermott. I think Mike McDermott might actually be the biggest influence in me being a professional poker player, if I'm honest with myself.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that a combination of people on the Channel 4 show Late Night Poker would certainly be the most influential. I wouldn't have known what poker was really before that. And then suddenly myself and my group of friends, when we were still school age, would play every Friday night for a $5 each or whatever it was. And that became a big kind of entertainment focal point for us, where we'd sit around a kitchen table and play cards. And that show was sort of very special of its time, very atmospheric, very moody, emphasis on the personalities. Standard of play of the day was probably okay, but not great. standard looking back is not very good. Obviously, we've all moved on, but they really captured something. The filmmakers captured something fantastic in that show. They really captured the players and made it seem sexy.
Yeah,
that was very appealing.
And I mean, that's what makes for compelling poker content, is the stories behind the scenes and where do people come from, right? Like that was the whole origin of Chasing Poker Greatness, was like, I know because I'm a professional poker player that you don't just wake up one day at the final table of a major event, that there's a process from grinding, learning, growing, improving, and then eventually having your successes and your failures. And I wanted to know the behind the scenes story. And sometimes I think poker can kind of just jump straight to the game without going a little deep into where people come from. But ultimately, like the story, the 2004 main event with Chris Moneymaker, you know that he's an accountant from Tennessee. You know that his parents are in the audience watching him. You know that like this is one of his first live events ever that he's satellited in from an online tournament, and like knowing the behind the scenes, the backstory, spending the time to tell these human beings' story who are on the big stage, I think makes for just a much better product. At the end of the day, they become people that we root for, people that we empathize with. And yeah, it's just necessary for good poker entertainment and content.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's sort of maybe two quite distinctly different approaches to content these days. One is still trying to do what you described there, tell the story. I guess that's like the ESPN audience once a year for WSOP. That used to be most of TV poker, but there isn't so much poker on TV anymore. And, for a lot of reasons, one, just the natural evolution of technology. We're more stream based, we're more internet based now these days as a culture. And that means live streams and, some of these package show streams, and they can afford to be a little bit more nuanced or clever because they're probably not attracting a new market. They're probably just pieces of content for already poker players who just want to see something cool. And that's how they're finding it. So there are two kind of ways of doing it. And I like both, to be honest. I really love watching, Lon and Norm and Jamie do their once a year thing on the WSOP. I find it charming. I find it funny. It's not deep level analysis all the time. It's the story of the event. But I think that's a great package TV show, and they're just brilliant at their jobs. And then similarly, I love Nick Schulman, as everyone does, and I love the sort of deeper dive commentators who can really break down a hand in real time and tell a story that way. I think it's great.
Yeah, and it could be the best of both worlds, right? It could be just the best of both worlds, where there's high level, just don't forget about the story, I guess, is for like all the poker producers out there, is the story is meaningful. The story behind the scenes matters. And it's why we root for our heroes, or love watching, the villains fall flat on their face, or love watching Phil Hellmuth blow up and, have like a 5-minute spot where you just can't understand anything he's saying because they're all curse words. And that's I like all of it personally. So tell me the story of your favorite poker session ever, or a very memorable poker session that springs to your mind.
Oh, okay. I guess it's probably a live deep run. Online poker, it's quite solitary. You might have a little virtual rail of friends who are kind of like watching in the chat, or maybe if you're doing it on stream, you have that effectively. But live events have always been quite fun. Quite early in my career, I had a result at the Full Tilt España series in Barcelona, and I was lucky enough to have my girlfriend of the time and a lot of friends on the rail, and I was really green to poker, and that was pretty much my first European live poker event almost. I was very much an online player. I played a little bit in the States at that point, but that was kind of cool. But that was a long time ago. So more recently, maybe I came second to Jack Sinclair in the JP Masters, which would be the sort of main side event to the Irish Open. That was maybe 3 years ago. That was fun. Jack was a fun person to get heads up with at the end. It was a good final table. It kind of went back and forth. I suppose some of the live stream stuff for Unibet has been really good fun as well. Like we would often put on these sit and go type things as a curtain raiser to a festival. And we've in the past invited Victor Blom to those. And that's always really good fun because Victor's a good friend of Dara and mine, a good friend of Unibet's in general. And while he is a quiet sort, he is an intense person to play poker against and a fun person to chat to, even though you might have to pull a few words out of him. He's a very good guy. You get a couple of drinks into him and get him into the bar later, he's full of chat. He opens up completely. but he's an enigma in so many ways to so many people. So getting to play with him on those feature tables is often really good fun.
Tell me about the energy level of going deep live, because I think that playing for high stakes or big tournament win online is one thing. And then playing at a live event or just playing live at your local card room, the energy levels are very different than online. So tell me about the energy levels going deep into those tournaments early on. What did you feel? What were you thinking?
Well, early on, to be honest, it's almost like not memorable. Similar to like when you ask somebody, how did the beginning of that online tournament that you won go? You're like, I don't even remember that tournament. That was like a postage stamp on my screen. I was just multi-tabling, and then that was the only one left with a few hours to go. So I guess a lot of live poker sort of blends into one when you grind the circuit like I do.
You mentioned the one that your girlfriend and you went deep and you were green, so it must have been a memorable experience, right?
Well, yeah, that one was kind of special. The reason being was I think it's the first tournament I ever satellited into from an online satellite into a live event that gave me a package. And then I got to go over to Spain. The package could have got me a hotel for 5 nights, but I decided to get a really not very nice, but perfectly okay 3-bedroom apartment that all my friends could stay in if they came over. So we did that instead and basically made a holiday out of it. And I remember I went into day 2 quite short, so short, in fact, that I remember my friend coming to me at the table and saying, it was only half an hour into day 2, sort of saying, we're going for lunch here and dinner in this place. Let us know if you can join us or whatever. And
Did
I
they
said,
play
actually,
poker?
What?
Did they play poker? Were they poker players?
A little bit.
They just there for you?
They were probably the kitchen table poker friends, as I described at the beginning.
Yeah.
And they said, and actually said, Suzanne, hang on there a second. I'm all in. And I put my chips in and I was all in probably for 15 bigs with ace king against kings, spiked an ace and built a big stack for the next few hours and never made it to that lunch or that dinner and made it to day 3, which was about 13 people left, made the final table, one of the chip leaders. And by the time the final table hit, everyone was sort of suitably recovered from their hangovers and dragged themselves out of bed and were on the rail. And that was really good fun. Bottles of champagne at the end, even though I chopped it with the guy. So even though I lost, there was, we sort of chopped the money and there was champagne had. It was good fun.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a very memorable experience. You had all your friends there staying with you in an apartment, going deep in your first live satellited tournament. I mean, that's pretty insane.
And to be honest, it was sort of, I don't want to say life-changing because I'm not sure if my life changed that much afterwards, but it was significant. Like my bankroll at the time was like 25K. This was my end of my second year playing poker and I won 81K. That was like, wow, okay, big boost.
That's a pretty nice early result and a great story. Really just a great story for your first, the first live event that you satellited in. So we'll go from there to your least favorite poker session ever, because that's the natural segue from all the good times. Let's now dredge up a bad time.
Bad one. I went on a viciously bad run, I want to say like 2015 or 16 live, where it was just one of those things where I was playing a lot of live poker and it just felt like I was busting 2 tournaments a day, not cashing anything, constantly just getting the bad beats. And that's normally, that's par for the course. But I remember it being a particularly protracted downswing and that being kind of bumming me out. I remember getting it in good in a tournament here in Malta, actually, and sort of almost like telling everyone, here, come watch how I'm going to get bad beated here, and getting bad beated and walking. I go, what the fuck? I'm just so sick of it. Dara O Kearney and I went on a sort of a summer road vacation poker around Europe, playing 10 or 11 festivals over 12 or 13 weeks. And I think at the end of it, we'd played 65 tournaments and we had one min cash between us. That was pretty grim. And then, but to be honest, it's probably like silly, like funny, silly stuff. Like I remember in a 100 quid side event in Newcastle, literally the smallest tournament of the week. And we were on the bubble, and I had sent for Dara to come over, rail the final table. I'm about to make the final table, got a good stack. And I looked down at aces, and I think I'm like 2 of 10 or 3 of 10. And I look down at aces and I min raise under the gun, and the big stack, who's the only guy who covers me, looks at me and then looks at my stack, and just, I guess in his head, he was like, oh, all the ICM pressure, and just like shoves 40 bigs, snap him off. He's got the king 5. And I end up bubbling that tournament. And I'm just like, I remember Dara arrived just as I bust. I remember being like, this is kind of a low point. I'm really pissed off about a 100 quid tournament here. That's not a great place to be mentally when you're this annoyed about something that's not really important at all.
Yeah, that's a sign things are not going your way. I do find it funny because I'll ask the question kind of knowing the answer of like, how did you feel working your way out of, those bad times?
Oh yeah, that's good. I used to have this weird thing where, you'd have your downswing, and I guess the stakes I was playing initially, they might have been like 3 or 4K. Then by the time I was in my 3rd or 4th year, they were definitely like 10 and 15K. And then I remember I had one real nasty one that was about 30K. It's probably still my biggest downswing, which I know is not actually that much. I'm a very kind of bankroll cautious person. So I've always been good at like dropping down, like halving my stakes for a few weeks if I was not feeling it. Just to get the confidence back, all that kind of stuff. Because I think a lot of bankroll management is actually about managing your emotions and managing your capability to take the pain. So I feel like that's as much of the management of what you're doing. So yeah, but like coming out of that, like getting the kind of couple of scores that sort of even get you back even on a horrible few months period. I remember like it always happened in the shower. I'd be in the shower the next morning after the result and just feeling really good, just like, water hitting you and just being like, okay, it's like I'm back. Like it's all of those thoughts I'd had for weeks of going, oh, I'm shit at this game. I've won hundreds of thousands of dollars playing poker, but like this 130K downswing, and I'm like, I was just rubbish. I was always rubbish. I was never any good at this game. I was obviously just lucky. Everyone who said they shouldn't be doing this were right. And then you'd have this like shower, and all the pressure would kind of go away, and you'd be like, oh no, actually I can play. It's okay.
Yeah, like the day before you're in the shower and you hear the birds chirping and you're like, fuck you, birds, shut up, you annoying piece of shit birds. And then like 24 hours later, you're like, this is so peaceful and nice. I love these birds.
Well put.
Life is just good.
In a world where a fish donk bets the flop and you don't know what to do, one man,
Coach Brad Wilson,
has a surefire plan to neutralize flop leads and rip that dunk to shreds. Nuffle. Available now. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com/nuffle. Rated R.
So John, you've used neutralized flop leads in the past 24 hours, correct?
Yeah, so I got basically the slide with all the info on it on Friday evening, and yesterday I played a session of 1KNL on Ignition and played one particular pot that I remember where a fish just donked flop turn river into me, and I ended up winning with a hand that I would have folded before looking at the slide, but I ended up winning like a $400 pot instead, and the course is $99, so definitely paid for itself very, very quickly. And I think that'll be the case for even people that aren't playing as big as 5-10 no limit. Like, I think this is a course that will very, very quickly pay for itself given how much more donking there is at lower stakes. And I think one of the most common questions I see asked in the Greatness Village Slack group is, what do donks mean? How do I deal with donk bets? I think that's gotta be like in the top 3 most frequently asked questions.
You ought to feel very excited when somebody donks into you because some good things are about to happen.
You said like you probably don't need anyone to teach the course, or like you can just look at the slide and learn all the info yourself. I feel like you, Brad, will have to be there because I'm almost sure that anybody who looks at the slide won't believe it looking at what they're supposed to do, and we'll have to confirm with you that like you didn't make a massive typo somewhere and that this is actually what they're supposed to do, because it's pretty shocking the optimal way to deal with fish donking into you on the flop is.
If you'd like to check out Neutralize flop leads so that you're never again confused when a fish leads into you in a single raise pot, head to chasingpokergreatness.com/nuffle. That's chasingpokergreatness.com/nuffle. And now, back to the show.
Tell me a valuable poker lesson you learned that felt pretty miserable at the time when you learned it.
Okay, I'm definitely not going to name names on this one, but when I staked poker players for a while, Dara and I and another guy called Dara Davey and Jason Tompkins had a sort of collective, we're all Irish lads, mostly staking Irish guys with a few Brits and Canadian or Americans thrown in. But it was definitely to do with that and exercising my judgment on that stuff. Because sometimes you sort of know, but you know, the guy's in makeup and you kind of think, well, anything he wins from now on is the upside of that. We get some of the money back, but you just kind of know already he's a losing player, and you let it go longer and it gets worse, and you just kind of bury him in a hole and bury yourselves, and you know you're just going to have to let him go deeper and deeper in makeup. And there was probably a point, maybe a couple of times with people we staked where deep down, maybe at least enough of us knew, but you're a human being too. And you kind of like, you want to see the guy do well. And they were usually people we knew really well. And actually, in fairness, there was definitely one complete turnaround story with one guy we staked who, tremendous guy, tremendous poker player, but was properly under it for a while. And we did stick with him and he came out big. So maybe I'm being results oriented in the sense that the guys who didn't ultimately get out are the ones you kind of remember and think, oh, could have let him go 25k earlier, or whatever it was. But that's probably where you kind of have those lessons where you're in a moment of time and you kind of have an opportunity to make a decision and you have to sort of live with it. But there are nagging regrets, maybe that kind of thing. Maybe just learning to trust your gut on those things more often.
Yeah,
like
your intuition, right? I think like as poker players, we understand that sometimes you just gotta fold, and that's the reality of it. And the times when you know you gotta fold and you don't fold, at least in my experience, haven't turned out so well. So yeah, like basically it's just, but instead of dealing with cards you're throwing in the muck, you're dealing with human beings you're throwing in the muck, which is a much more serious thing. And yeah, it's just, I guess long story short, it's complicated in those spots.
Yeah, and I certainly don't think you were fishing for this, but like, I suppose to some people I would be viewed, Dara to some extent viewed, the Chip Race brand viewed, I don't know, as antagonistic at times, or as people who will sort of fire shots. And we do, and I think we're very selective about how we do. Like, again, I think we create a lot of content, and then maybe the memorable thing that kind of went viral to some extent is maybe the big argument we had with something, or the big stand we took against something, and then people go, oh, those guys are always just looking for clicks and fighting the big fights and trying to get press for themselves. But it's really not like that. It really comes down to choosing your battles quite carefully and cleverly, I think. And I think we've always done that very meticulously. Darren and I will often talk about things that we are mildly annoyed by in poker and just think, is it worth it? You know, how much do you want to put your reputation as a kind of a cage rattler on this? Is this a big enough deal? Maybe if something else happens, it is. Maybe we leave it for now. And I think we make those judgment calls all the time. But I actually think we make them very well. And actually, I don't regret any even more sort of volatile public argument I had with anyone. I think I'd still stand by the side of it I was on.
No, I have no idea. I wasn't fishing for that, actually.
No. It occurred to me.
Yeah. I think that maybe that's a perception. I don't know. Actually, I would say that, like, just me, my perception is that if either of you are antagonistic, it would be you and not Dara. I've never really seen Dara as like an antagonistic human being, but maybe
Dara was on a one-man. Well, I suppose I was helping him at the time, but he was certainly on a very anti-star sentiment back when they were being very poor to the poker community in general. And I thought his blogs in particular galvanized a lot of people's opinions around the right way to interpret what was happening. I think for the record, I think stars are very much reformed these days, and I think they're both with their ambassador team and with their internal team a very different operation. But I think it was absolutely right to be very, very appalled by what was going on at one time. And Dara was as loud a voice in the community as I think there was then.
That to me is just totally justifiable and merited. Based on
all justifiable and merited.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Well, I guess it's subjective, right? Some things are more justifiable and more merited, I guess, than other things. But the whole stars situation. I mean, I guess people that listen to my show know that I'm fairly antagonistic towards most poker platforms that exist.
As you should be. We should all be all the time. We should always be pointing out problems, because that is the only way you can do any amount of pushback on big multinational companies that are becoming more and more synergized and conglomerate. We're going to end up at some point with very few operators out there, and without that competition of those guys fighting against each other, we have to do things with our feet. We have to, more than just express ourselves with words, sometimes actually express ourselves with actions. It's vitally important. So if you can offer an opinion which galvanizes people, which helps people go, yeah, kind of what that guy said. That now it's clear in my head. And then that message spreads. There is pushback there. People might go, oh, well, the Supernova guys never got their money back and things like that. And that's absolutely true. They fucking should have. They still should. Stars should still go into their war chest and sort those people out. But within reason, or within the context of now, you have to just always fight back on these things. And it could be an awful lot worse if you hadn't. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, I've been in this industry for a long time. And if I know one thing, I know this. It's that the poker players as a community have to defend ourselves. And we cannot rely on operators to protect us, because operators typically will not. I mean, it brings me all the way back to Ultimate Bet and the Russ Hamilton deal. Ultimate Bet did not uncover the super using. They were not the people who found that. It was the poker community policing themselves. And like it, hate it, whatever, you have to live with it and understand that we have to look out for ourselves. And that means calling out bullshit when we see it and calling out shenanigans when we see it. And at least in my case, there hasn't been any operator that has backed up the Brinks truck to bring me on board to basically squelch my opinion. And I would say that will likely almost never happen, because I don't want my opinion to be squelched. I don't want to have to think about what I can or cannot say. I want to be untethered so that I can try to approach what happens in the industry.
Well, I think that means that you're probably ruling yourself out of some of the big sites.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Because there's always a perception, if you're with Stars or GG these days or Party Poker, that if you do fire off your bigger shots against those sites, it's always viewed that, well, you're the guy from the rival doing it. I think in some way with some of the smaller sites, and I would champion Unibet as, within the industry, an ethical site who have no scandals attached to them and have, a very good track record when it comes to regulation and everything else. I would say that when you're with some of the smaller operators, you can still fire your shots, because maybe their perception is you're the Unibet pro, and it's not this kind of Stars Party GG triangle. You're kind of outside of that firing in, and that's kind of okay.
Do you think it kind of weakens public perception of your opinion, or makes the public feel like you're maybe biased?
Oh, it should. You should absolutely think that. The public should always take an ambassador's word with a pinch of salt, but they should also listen to the substance of what that person is saying. And if the substance of what that person is saying is very accurate, truthful, circles in on what they think themselves, then they can still have some confidence in it and they can still feel like it's the right thing. I am absolutely there to be bludgeoned in the public sphere. If Unibet do something wrong or something scandalous, of course that would reflect back on me and I would take heat for that and I would be made answerable. It's exactly the way it should be. Unibet should not be doing things that the poker community think is really wrong. And if they did, I would be one of the faces who would have to kind of, bear the brunt of that. So, but I think that's right. I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
And then that puts pressure on me internally with Unibet and whatever it would be to make sure we stay on a good path and aren't viewed that way. And people will have their issues about different decisions made, I'm sure. But you have to still, yes, any ambassador is probably even more than actually just, do you take it with a pinch of salt? You might even find with a lot of these, it's not in my contract overtly, but like you can't say anything about certain things. I don't know. My guess is there's certain people in the industry right now who have signed contracts in the recent past who are being muzzled by the very site that they represent. Now, of course, I can't go out there and say, Unibet are crap, and I can't badmouth the brand. But I can talk about poker in a real way, and I can make criticisms of Unibet that I think are valid. I can talk about if something was structured badly or our rake was too high in something. I can say that, and I have said that in the past about things that I thought we could do better. And I think it's part of an internal dialogue that we have in the company that I have the ear of the head of poker, the marketing people. I should be able to have those chats, and people should know that I also disagree if we do something like that. But it does strike me right now that there are people in the industry, probably quite well-paid ambassadors or whatever they are, who are not able to say what they really think and are actually being muzzled by their contracts. In fact, I've seen one of the contracts of one of these people at this tier, and I know it's ugly. Like, I know they're being, coerced, or whatever the opposite of coerced is, muzzled, I suppose.
Yeah, basically shackled. They can't.
Shackled, yeah.
They can't say what their true opinion really is, and to me, yeah, it's whenever you're a X platform pro, I think that you lose your ability to express bullshit when you see it within the platform that you're a sponsored pro. And I guess for me, it's too, it's like, unless you're at the very top of the top and you're not like a mid-tier, low-tier type pro for a platform, the financial payment is not enough to it's not enough to
it's not enough, full stop, Brad. They're honestly, it shouldn't be a price, it should be about feeling comfortable in the role. If you feel like you could be a party poker pro tomorrow, if you feel like you could be a party poker pro tomorrow because you're happy with the way they run their business, you like the team, you think their initiatives that they have planned and some things that they're going to do in the next while are good, then you can do that quite fulsomely. But if you don't, and they go, oh, but here's $1 million, Brad, and you go, oh, okay, then I don't know, man. I'm not saying people aren't human and they don't have their price, but I think that's problematical.
I like to think I have my price, but I don't know. Like, I can't imagine somebody offers me that kind of deal, and like me telling my wife, I think she would just like,
of course you're taking.
Yeah, she would leave me immediately if I turned it down. Like, I wouldn't really have an option, I don't think.
But I thought that was funny, actually. Doug Polk, about, I don't know, a couple of months ago now, was doing one of his interviews. And he said, he was very funny about it because he was like, I want to get out of poker now. Maybe I'll do a little thing. Maybe I'll make a little bit of content, but I'm basically out again and I want to be out again. He said, well, hang on a minute. Like, if one of the big sites turned around and said, hey, Doug, do you want to be a pro for us? Here's $5 million. He'd be like, well, I guess I'm a pro again. So, I suppose to some extent, and of course you can do a lot of good with any money you make. You're not just obliged to, stack it up in your bedroom.
I don't know. I ultimately, I think I have had the opportunity to represent or basically on board different platforms that are darker shade of gray than maybe some other ones that were very lucrative things that I could have done. And I did not do it because it just wasn't in the best interest of my audience. It wasn't in the best interest of my listener to be involved in places where there's a very high risk that something bad occurs with money because they believed in me. I couldn't really lay my head down on the pillow and live with myself. And when I say a significant amount of money, I'm like, it's an actual, like mid 6 figures, maybe even closer to 7 figures a year type thing.
Well, look, I just like when it comes to that, I just feel as though like it's a low bar. So you should be getting over this bar. Is that the site you represent are regulated? They are segregating funds. They are, following the laws of all the plans that they're in.
What are you talking about, Lappin? You know where I'm at. There's no regulation anywhere. This is like a wasteland.
But that's what I mean. Like that, then you could never offer that guarantee in that environment, in that climate. And therefore, I do think it's a much more difficult thing. Yeah.
And the reality is, I think, again, like in the middle of last year, I just had this thought of like, you want to do this content creation thing. You want to help people. You want to make an impact. Like you've got to put on your big boy pants and you have to do this yourself. And that was the conclusion that I came to, because if I build my own brand, if I build courses that help people and I build a community, then I don't need to be sponsored by anybody. Like there's not a poker platform, I don't think, in the US that could pay me enough money to take me away from what I'm doing in my community and what I'm doing with my brand. And so I don't even really have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it because I know that like what I've built is great. It gives me fulfillment. I'm helping people and the revenue is growing over time, which is a side bonus. And basically it just means that like, I don't need that sort of sponsorship to enable me to make content forever. Because I mean, like you said, there's a lot of manpower, a lot of time, a lot of energy that goes into content creation. And so, yeah, I guess the way that I went about it was like, I'm going to bet on myself. And that way I don't ever have to be in that position to where like, if I want to continue doing the thing that I love, I have to basically accept payment from someone who I may or may not agree with the things that they do.
Well, like just to point out that there is, like, it's not completely hypothetical in our case. Over the years, Dara and I have been approached, but both before Unibet and while we were with Unibet, by other sites who were interested in taking the show over to them. In a lot of those cases, two I can think of, there would have been a restriction put on, well, you can't have pros from X site. So you're already being cut off from some of the potential guests. Now, we have no restriction on guests. We have everybody and anyone. We try and have a balance where we do have some, sponsored pros. And of course, they could be named as 888 Pro so-and-so or whatever it would be. But we don't let them promote their, like, the next 888 tournament that's on. Like, that's not something that we're going to ever let someone do. But there is some implicit, I guess, benefit to them and their sponsor that they're on the show. But but as soon as you were sort of like with somebody who said, well, you can't have anyone from X site, that just feels wrong to me, to be honest, because I kind of feel like if the point of your show is to sort of give a fair, sweeping demographic of what's going on in poker right now, you can't cut off any avenue. You can't suddenly say, well, it's the chip race, but not that race. It's not that site. Yeah,
and that's a red flag to me for a platform that I would never want to work for, because I'm not far enough removed from the game to not remember why I got in the game. And I got in the game because I wanted freedom and autonomy. And as soon as people start telling me what I can and what I cannot do, or who I can and who I cannot talk to, that is, well, it tells me that they probably don't understand poker players, because taking away a poker player's freedom is like, I think that most of us would say that like that's a thing that they're not going to give away happily. because that's why they got into poker in the first place. And so, like, to me, that's sort of a red flag. And yeah, like, I'm just going to do what I want to do and have the people on my show that I want to have. And it doesn't really matter to me, I guess, who they're promoting, because everybody's got to make a living and everybody's got to do what's best for their family. So who am I to judge? Who am I to judge that somebody represents 888? But I do see the business side of it. But to me, it speaks for like a corporate, just a corporate culture of like control that may not understand how poker players operate or think or go through their lives.
And would you put any sort of band list together? Like, for this show, are there people where you're like, well, no, I wouldn't have him on because he represents something, not necessarily a site, but maybe an ideology or maybe an opinion that he has shared vociferously? Like, would you go, well, no, I don't want that person on? Or at some level, would you think, well, maybe I should have that person on and challenge them on it and whatever it would be?
I've had both. I waffle back and forth. Luckily, the poker world is inhabited by a bunch of like really good humans that I want to have on the show. So it's not really a thing that I have thought about a ton. But no, I mean, basically, my opinions are subjective based on my own life experience. So really, who am I to, if it's something somewhat reasonable, right? Like I think by somewhat reasonable, like I'm not going to have Bilzerian on, right? He doesn't want to come on the show, but again, I'm not going to have him on the show, even if he did want to, which, again, because my wife would maybe divorce me if I did have Bilzerian on the show. But like,
no, but hopefully not, because you're like, I like the first part of that more because it's like, yeah, on principle, I would not have Bilzerian, and I wouldn't really have anyone on the show, to be honest.
But that's the point, right? If somebody that I love, somebody in my close circle, like dislikes somebody this profoundly and this much, and they don't offer much value to the world, to the poker world, then yeah, I don't want to have them on the show, because what's the point?
Yeah, no, look, I just, like, I'm offended by Bilzerian. You can do that. Well, I have friends who are women who are offended, but it's not, I'm offended by him. I find him gross. And yeah. I think it's really gross that he's got quite a big position in the biggest up and coming company in poker. Like, I think it's good for poker to have companies doing well and, challenging stars. But I think this is a really disgusting thing. And yeah, for that reason, like, I would do everything to deplatform him if possible.
I mean, he can do what he does. Yeah. He just wouldn't come on my platform, I guess. I don't know. He's really the only person that kind of springs to mind. I guess there are basically anybody that scams people. I don't want to give a voice to anybody that takes advantage of the poker community, who scams people. That those would be my disqualifiers for the show. But like a different political ideology, a different belief of platforms, sponsored from a company whose ideology I totally disagree with. I don't care. They can promote the company that they work for on my show, and I could care less, because that's just a part of it. But
what about a reform scammer? What about somebody who had sort of maybe like done their dues since, like maybe an early mistake, and they've sort of done right since?
I think that anybody who can go through their life and claim that they haven't made shameful and regrettable decisions is probably.
Well, no, but we're talking about scammers. I mean, like,
well, scammers, but really, it's just an overarching.
Not like, I got drunk that night and told my friend to fuck off. I mean,
it's like an overarching theme of, like, of course, I would have somebody who's a reformed scammer on the show. Like, if I felt they were genuine and like remorseful, and they had basically, yeah, of course, we've all made mistakes. I think we've all done regrettable things, and to just label someone based on something that they did a long time ago that they have a lot of shame for, and then exclude them when they're trying to make amends, doesn't feel right to me. So
I think that's very fair.
Yeah. I mean, I would have somebody on like that. That's.
Yep. We have had people like that on our show as well. I think that's right. I think you're right. If there's a level of contrition or there's dues paid back to the community, I think that does change things.
And I think it's important that their story is heard too. I think that they have.
So maybe Dan Bilzerian will see the error of his ways, and 5 years from now will go on the Chip Race and the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast expressing how reformed he is.
Maybe.
Even hope.
I don't think it's very likely, but maybe Lappin. All right, so let's move on to the lightning round segment of this, and we got about 11 minutes before KL drops in.
Love KL. Can we do an overlapping interview with KL?
Of course. Why not?
Fastest finger. I'm ready. I'm on my buzzer.
All right. What's a common assumption people make about their poker careers you think they ought to spend more time thinking about?
Longevity. I think far too many poker players are preoccupied with the big score. I think maybe the whole backing culture within poker has been accelerated because everyone's chasing playing the big game and getting into the big game for the big 6-7 figure payday, and actually don't understand that really the key to this game is surviving in the game and giving, which gives you time and puts you in positions to have these occasional outliers, these occasional big scores. But if you just set your stall out to win a more modest amount of money each year, something that's actually very doable, then these other big scores may come along anyway, and that's really nice. But if you take too much risk, then in the pursuit of the big score, it's way too easy to go broke, and far too many much better poker players than I have done that over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long game. The tournament doesn't end when you bust out. The session doesn't end when you cash out at the cage. It goes on forever, and you want poker to be a sustainable career, then you have to treat poker like a profession. There's just no way around it. What's a purchase you've made in the last year that's been impactful to your poker game?
Been on the DTO train longer than a year, but that was very good. I also have a run at once account. That's very good. Anything in the last year, though? Pads on pads is very good. Does that count?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, that's within the last few months.
That's in the last few months.
Pads. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
that's pads on pads at run at once too, right?
At run at once. Yeah, that's really good. I bought a new computer, which definitely has made my poker better because it's a bigger screen and it's a fancier Mac. I've gone back to Mac. I was a Mac user for years. I went back to PC and now I'm back at Mac again. And that's probably made things better just because just a bit nicer machine to use. It's probably made me some money, I'm guessing.
I would say I bought, I did that thing where I called my friend, like we were talking about earlier. I called a friend who's tech savvy, and I said, yo, if you were going to buy a computer for yourself that was going to last you 5 years, which one would you buy? And he sent me a link, and I was like, whatever, I don't care about the price. I'm just going to buy it. And I have to say, best thing I've done in a very long time, not having to wait on things to load, everything being fast. I never want to go back to a world where I can't process things very, very quickly.
I am going to, I didn't have to pay for this, which is why I didn't say it. But actually, most people would have to pay for it. I believe it might be on sale at $6.99 right now on Amazon. Dara O Kearney and Barry Carter's book, PKO Poker Strategy, is very important information in that one for the modern game these days, because so much of the tournament schedule is PKOs. There is some other good PKO stuff out there, but their book is the Bible for me now. And I think, if you can absorb a lot from that, there's a lot of shorthand ways of doing guerrilla maths quickly. It gives you the kind of tricks of how to do, these kind of harder, calculations on the fly. I think that's been it's a bargain at what you pay for it. If you are happy to do some book learning, I'm sure Dara has maybe got some seminar courses as well. But that PKO stuff, it's probably more than a year ago, or it's around a year ago, but that was very good.
I would say that...
And I didn't have to pay for it. That was completely free. He gave me a signed copy, no money, exchange hands.
That's very generous of him, and it's $6.99 too, so you would have had to break the bank to get your own.
Well, and that mightn't even include shipping, so it might have been $10.
Right. I think that just across the board, poker trading is relatively cheap, and lots of people will disagree with that and say that it's expensive, but as it relates to gaining skills that make you money straight away, poker training as a whole, is extremely, extremely cheap in my opinion. And you're not going to find another real industry where you can legitimately make like $30 to $50 an hour in like a year worth of work and investing whatever $5,000 or $10,000 into your poker education. So yeah, always invest into training products. And I think too, like just with the pot odds model, the way that it works is you find one thing like Dara's book that costs $7 that makes you tens of thousands of dollars. And it's a pretty easy call.
Oh, I remember when it first came out, and I think it is on sale. Amazon are doing a sale at the moment. That's why it's that cheap. But I think it's normally, a Kindle version might be $12 or something. And I said something like on Twitter, this will literally pay for itself your first session back. The first session you do, you can pick up those $10 very easily on a screen of, maybe multi-thousand games. A guy came in and was like, oh, that's a ridiculous thing to say. Imagine saying like you could make the money back in one night. And I was like, well, it's like 10. Of course you could. Like you can easily make a $10 mistake deep in a PKO. That's like something that's very easy to do when you're not really au fait with the shorthand of how to work out the value of the bounty or whatever.
Yeah, I have a course called Neutralize Flop Leads that I refer to as Nuffle. And it's just basically how to deal with donk bets. And I price it at $99 because it's like a single PDF and very, very simple. And everybody that bought it within 48 hours paid for itself. And I actually doubled the price because like I just recognize it's so valuable. Kid goes, plays live poker first night. He's playing, like has a situation where a recreational player leads into him. And he wins, like calls down with kings on an ace high board and like wins a $3,500 pot. And it's like, okay, well, basically Nuffle paid for itself 10 times over just in that one pot. So yeah, it's just poker training. Just invest your time and your energy. A book like Dara, I mean, man, it doesn't seem controversial at all to say that $10 pays for itself over a session, because what's $10 when you're playing poker, right?
Exactly. And I think, again, Dara and Barry are great this way. They don't write books to make loads of money off them. Obviously they're happy when the book sales are good, but their primary purpose, I know for Dara especially, is that he likes being a teacher. He likes imparting knowledge to people. And he fundamentally believes something that I also believe, which is that all ships need to rise. If you can if you create content that's like thousands of dollars for the elite players to get super, super duper good, and there's nothing going out there at the cheaper levels for the, fish or the recreationals or whatever you want to call them, and they're not improving enough, they're just going to get destroyed, and then they're not going to want to come back because it's very obvious to them, I'm just getting battered every time I play poker. So you need to create content that makes them feel like they have a chance. They need to feel like they're improving, their own games are getting better. Okay, the best players might still be getting better faster than them, but they need to be competitive. Variance in poker will always give them some chance. And if they can just have a few skills and they can just make a few, like Dara's satellite book, for example, is like the best example of this ever, because again, it's one of these ones that's probably a 10 quid Kindle or a 20 quid book. And the amount of recreational players who've gotten into the full buy-in live tournament because they figured out that they need to fold some big hands late on. And just the explanation of those things and how it's sunk in has totally given them a much better chance, kept much more money in their ecosystem, which, eventually the best players will win anyway. But if you skin these people alive too quickly and they just have no chance, then actually the game is in trouble. So you need to create training tools for all the buying levels and all the affordability. And in reality, with those two books, you're getting quite a sophisticated bit of knowledge for a recreational price, if you like, price tag.
Absolutely. And you could also make the argument that the content that y'all put out strategically is free, right? Like there's a lot of strategic content that's readily available, 100% free, where you don't have to pay anything. And there's value in that as well.
Yep.
Have you ever strongly believed something about poker only to reverse course later on? And if so, what led to that change of belief?
I strongly believed that I shouldn't flat suited aces in position, because I just thought you need to 3-bet or fold those hands for a long time, I guess. I fundamentally didn't believe you should ever donk for a long time. was convinced that was not a thing. There's a lot. I the click wars of 2009 are just so perverse now, where people are literally just pushing buttons back and forth to each other, and it now looks insane that nobody ever thought of hitting call and like let's go to the streets. But it was such a fundamental like razor fold mindset or psychology around poker for so long. I didn't defend range as anything close to correct in the small blind or in the big blind. Just the notion of having to pretty much defend all my suited hands like that, looking down at the ugly jack twos and queen threes, I put them in the bin for years.
Right.
That was leaking chips too.
Yeah, I mean, it was just people not understanding how, like, pre-flop, a lot of the equities run together. And when you're getting a really good price pre, because of pot odds, you pretty much need to be defending very, very, very often, especially in tournaments with antes, and this very small raise sizes just means you got to defend way more often.
I thought live poker tells weren't really a thing, insofar as I thought, okay, they're probably something, but I thought, oh, well, no, the game is just basically 99% strategy and doing the right stuff. And then I played live poker for a little while, and I was like, oh no, you can totally like get loads of equity out of people by just staring at them and figuring out what they have. So like I was totally blinkered that way too for years when I was just an online player.
What led to those changes, do you think? Just continuing to develop your game?
Well, just having any amount of open-mindedness to not necessarily always thinking you're right helps. And I'm somebody who will always sort of argue and debate my side of something. But that isn't meant to mean that because I'm arguing it very strongly means that I'm not malleable and I couldn't change my mind. The point of arguing something very strongly is to force your opponent who thinks differently to argue strongly back at you, and then maybe they'll convince you with a really good argument, and then you'll completely have a Copernican turn on it and believe something different. And that happens often for me. I would have quite big revolutions in my thought because I've adamantly debated the pros of one side of something only to figure out that a smarter person contradicted me too well and they must be right.
Yeah, it's you want to be wrong in those kind of debates because the loser of the debate is the one who gains knowledge and is stronger for it. And I think that like as poker goes on, we're going to see a lot of these things that were once thought of as ludicrous become more common and become more accepted by the higher level thinking players in the world. And
we're going to have a few of those. I think we're going to have a few of those within this paradigm. So like right now, obviously we're exploring the benefits of like single big blind bets. And that was sort of not a thing. You'd sort of like 30% was like the bottom end of what you would have fired out as a C bet years ago. And now it's like literally you're trying to find the smallest amount possible in lots of situations. Similarly with over bets, we're exploring all the different ranges of ways you can do that. Solvers are obviously creating toy games where maybe we give them 3 or 4 options, but we're not giving them 20 options. And maybe maybe the 20th option, the weirdest, most extreme one, would suddenly become the one they like more, and discovering the strategy around that. I think the fact that ICM as a concept is being much more deeply explored right now, and people are starting to get to grips with the benefits of it, but in a similar journey, realizing its limitations and realizing that future game equity has to be factored in somehow. And I imagine we're going to have computer programs which can simulate a sort of a more balanced value to your chips to the dollar amount at the end of the tournament. And I reckon that's a very, unexplored area right now that I'm sure in a few years' time will seem so obvious now because we have computers that can, do these calculations. So now we have these better heuristics, these better ballparks for understanding what, probably is the way I should change my range or whatever it happens to be. That stuff is, still the game's going to move on. So we're just as much as I'm laughing at myself 10 years ago, making mistakes then, I'm sure I'll be laughing at myself
10 years from now. Yep. That's just the nature of poker. That's what makes it such a beautiful game, the complexity and just the depth of it. It makes it exciting and interesting to continue on in this world. And with that said, final question is, where can the Chasing Poker Greatness audience find you, David Lappin, on the World Wide Web?
You can find me on Twitter at DK Lappin. I'm there a lot. You can subscribe to the Chip Race on SoundCloud or iTunes. You can hear my lovely voice and Dara O Kearney's lovelier voice weekly, because between the two shows, the Lock-In and the Chip Race, we have something going out every week. You can find me on Unibet Poker with my own ugly face avatar in all the sort of $25 and up games that we have nightly. And you can tune in to the 100th episode of the Chip Race. When does this show go out? I hope it goes out soon, because we have a 100th episode of the Chip Race going out very soon. It's either almost coming out or it's already happened, depending on when this happens. But please do check that one out. We've got Doug Polk on the show with Ape Styles, and we've also got Annette O'Carroll, wonderful Irish veteran who gives us a history of poker in Ireland over the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's a great episode. So check all of those things out.
And your favorite podcast host, me, Brad Wilson, submitted a question for the 100th episode. So I have a little cameo in there.
One of the longest cameos. You asked a really long question on purpose, and you get a lot of airtime, almost as much as our secondary guest on the show. Your question was so long. But we're delighted to have you on there. And of course, and this is a promise, we will have Brad Wilson on in season 15. So watch out for him this summer.
Yep. And I'll be there to promote it. And thanks, man. I really appreciate your time and your energy. And we'll be talking again in the very near future.
Without doubt. And I have to say, before I go, credit to you and this show. You are an absolute machine. I know we joke about the number of episodes you do, and I can even see your next guest appearing before me, which is the conveyor belt that I described earlier. Yeah. but genuinely, you are pumping out content. You are creating great interviews, really interesting material for people and yourself to look back on, I'm sure, over the years as well. But just for anyone who subscribes, it's such a treat, and you're always there to, walk the dog with, or in my case, take some long walks around the coastline here in Malta. I listen to you often. So thank you so much for all of that.
It's my pleasure, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. If you have yet to subscribe to the show, please take a second to do so on Apple Podcasts or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts may be. For more content from me, Coach Brad, please visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/enhanceYourEdge, and I'll see you next time.